Okay. So in terms of that readiness for change business, the pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, did you sense any movement during that little 5-minute vignette? I mean, clearly at the end of it, he wasn't going to go, he hadn't decided to go from being a smoker to not being smoking. I think you could say he wasn't even in an action phase. Maybe he was a little bit on the sort of pre-contemplative to early contemplation, little movement. But again, the goal, one of the things that I like about this, I got to tell you, at the end of a day, a clinical day, I feel a whole lot less burnt out. And one of the reasons is I think I've changed my definition of what success looks like. So if success is I got a patient who smokes and the number of patients who stop smoking that day, then I'm going to succeed, 1 out of 1,000 days. If success all of a sudden becomes, have there been any movement at all along that gradual continuum toward getting a person to change, then I'm successful a whole lot more of the time. And I would suggest that there was a little movement there. Did you notice any point where it seemed like there was some change in the patient? Physicist.
Yeah, I would say from his body talk, he was building barriers between the patient and the doctor. Yeah. There were some defensive barriers, and that made him start thinking about what to do, and also he didn't believe a word he said about the 6 and the 3, if I remember correctly. Yeah. It's much higher in his mind.
You think it's higher in his mind?
So from his body.
So the 6 and 3, by the way, that's a tool that you can actually take home. Remember I said that my job today is 2 things, assessing someone's readiness and capacity for change and then doing motivational interviewing. A very simple way to start that conversation, readiness and capacity, is with those simple scales. How important of a problem is? How ready are you on a scale of 0 to 10? How important is it? And in terms of capacity, if you made the decision to do something about it, to what extent do you think you actually could do something? So he had a little bit of movement. Now the follow-up question, what's an MI follow-up question? Do I say, why is it a 6 and not a 10, or do I say, why is it a 6 and not a 0? Which of those would be an MI consistent question? The second one, because the last thing we want to do is give the person an opportunity to put voice toward all the reasons they don't. What we want to do is give them opportunities to talk about why they would want to change. And was there a point in the interview where you felt like the person really might have started thinking a little bit differently? Was there anything was there a moment in the interview that seemed, what struck you?
There was a reflection saying, it seems you do not want to change, and then he said, I will one day.
So there was a reflection, not a question. I've seen this enough times that I remember it specifically. He says, so this is something you will do for the rest of your days. Now that wasn't judgmental. It wasn't like, oh, so you're going to smoke for the rest of your life? It's just reflecting. This is something you're going to do for the rest of your days. And what happened? The person said, if that's what you heard me say, no, that's not what I meant to say. I don't plan to smoke for the rest of my days. I'm not ready to quit now, but I want to quit at some point. To me, every time I watch that, that's where I see the turn. And that's a very skillful use of something called an amplified reflection. Basically taking it up a notch. Person never said, I'm going to smoke for the rest of my life. But he amplified it. And then the reaction was, no. Right? So it's interesting, skillful use of that. So that just gives you a sense of of what it looks like. And again, if you counted the words, patient did a lot more of the talking. There was a genuine sense of meaningful collaboration. He was evoking from the patient why he would want to change. And there was this clear sense that the doc understands that the only way he's going to change is when he decides to change. So in terms of technique, if you were going to actually decide to embrace this and try to get better at it, one of the things you would start doing is you would start using what they call the ORs. You'd use a lot of open-ended questions rather than closed-ended questions. You'd use affirmations, reflections, and summaries. We'll talk a little bit about them. So closed-ended questions, of course, are those that usually elicit a 1 or 2 word answer, right? Categorical or dichotomous. And open questions are the opposite. So I don't know if there are docs in the rooms. You guys are docs. How do you take a smoking history? What's your typical smoking history? What are some questions that you ask for a smoking history?
We don't.
How many do you smoke? What else? For how long? What else? How many? For how long? How old are you when you started? Have you ever quitted? Right? Every single one of those questions is a closed-ended question. And they're fine, but that's what most clinicians spend most of their time doing, asking a series of closed-ended questions. So these kinds of things, right? This would be my typical question is this: what, if anything, has been your experience with cigarette smoking? And then if you don't get the answers you need, you can always follow them up with closed-ended questions. So you would start learning, you'd start noticing what percentage of my questions are open-ended and what percentage of them are closed, and you would try to go more toward open. Affirmations, won't talk too much about this, but a lot of this all takes place in an interpersonal context. And affirmations can be really, really powerful. And they have to be genuine. It's noticing and appreciating a strength that may be applicable, that a person may have demonstrated in one capacity that may be applicable to the next. And there are lots of different kinds. I will tell you that in the 8 or 10 years that I've been doing this, it's the affirmations that I'm starting just now to realize how powerful they are. But things like, it sounds like you've really thought a lot about this and have some good ideas, et cetera, et cetera. This must have been hard for you. I got to tell you, the one that I find myself using the most is this. I do a lot of work in emergency room settings and work with patients who don't want to be sitting in front of me. And I hear a lot of, I got to tell you, Doc, you seem like a nice guy, but I think this psychiatry stuff is a bunch of crap. I'm here because my parole officer says I need to be here. I'm here to get my wife off my back. And man, affirming something about that, something like, I appreciate the fact that you tell it like it is. You're a straight shooter. You're not here to waste your time or mine. It can be really powerful. So a big difference in an MI consistent method of communicating versus a normal conversation is that the modal things that come out of an MI professional's mouth are reflections. You use the term reflection, right? By definition, not a question, a statement, a hypothesis that may or may not be right. Has the effect of encouraging the other person to elaborate, amplify, confirm, or correct. And there are 2 basic kinds. We talk about simple reflections. It could be as simple as, I am really having a lousy day today. Well, you're having a lousy day today. It's a simple reflection. Or, today has been a particularly difficult day. Just paraphrasing. Just throwing back what you hear. Okay? Most reflections, though, are going to be reflecting what you are hypothesizing to be beneath the surface. And again, the goal of today is not to make you MI proficient. It's to give you a flavor of my real goal is to turn on a few light bulbs and to have a couple of people walk out of here and say, that sounded interesting, I'd like to learn a little bit more about it. If you choose to learn more about it, you're going to end up spending time thinking about language very carefully. And when you're with patients, if your goal is to evoke from them if your goal is to get them to start talking about the reasons that they would want to make changes, then there's a skill set involved in doing that, and using reflective listening is a key part of that skill set. And there are lots of different ways of kinds of complex reflections, paraphrasing, metaphors. The one that you saw there was a very skillful amplified reflection. You can reflect the affect. We very often use double-sided reflections. On the one hand, you find that smoking marijuana lets you relax in a way that allows you to enjoy your wife and kids. And on the other hand, you know that it's getting you in all kinds of trouble. Just reflecting that. Useful reflections are concise and clear, are accurate, and most importantly, you shut up after you say them. Right? Because the goal really is keeping the flow. The other interesting thing about reflections is you can't cheat and make a statement that isn't a question but that ends up. So if I say to you, think about this, think about how different these two statements that have the same words are. You're thinking about leaving your wife. I'm reflecting that, right? Person's talking to me, well, you're really thinking about leaving your wife. Versus, you're really thinking about leaving your wife? Right? I mean, one is like just, here's what I'm hearing. You're really thinking about leaving your wife? Yeah, no, yeah, whatever. The other is this kind of stopper. You know, all of a sudden the person's back on their heels. Well, I'm not sure. So reflective listening is this really interesting skill that takes a while to get better at. And I don't know about you guys who work in mental health, but for me, we talk about complicated things. And there is so much signal loss that can happen in a conversation, and a reflection allows you to check that. So right now, I have some ideas in my head that I'd like to convey to you. Okay? So I have some ideas about what I want to say. Whether or not I'm choosing the right words, I may not pull the right words out to best convey what I want to say, so there's some signal loss there. I'm not sure what it is that you're actually hearing me say, and there's some language differences here, and you may misinterpret some of the things that I'm saying. And I don't know what you think, what do you think I mean to convey? What a reflection does is it allows for an iterative, okay, here's what I heard, and then I can say, well, yes, but, yes, and it can really go from there. Okay? If a good reflection is a flower, then a good summary is a bouquet. Right? So summaries are basically a series of, here's what over the last few minutes, here's what I heard you say. You said this, this, and this. And that can be so powerful because A, it says I'm listening. B, it allows the clinician to pull the things that they would like to shine a light on. Great for transitioning, great for summing things up, etc. So if we had more time, we would give you guys practice, but I don't think we have time to do that. But it's a great thing to actually practice, to try to like do a real play or a role play and just try to keep track of open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries, and see what's difficult. So, one question that I often get is, if I'm just reflecting, how do we get anywhere? If I'm I got all this great information, but if I just reflect back everything I hear, how do we prevent ourselves from just going in circles? How is it directive? Right? How is it not just Rogerian, client-centered, but I have an agenda. I want the patient to stop smoking. I want the patient to not beat his child. How do we do that? How do we avoid going in circles? And the answer is by skillfully listening for and differentially responding to two types of language. And if you get in this sort of MI spirit and MI technique head, when you're in a conversation with someone about something that they're doing that's problematic, you're going to start automatically lumping what they say into two big baskets. A change talk basket and a sustained talk basket. All the reasons why they should think about changing and all the reasons why they're not going to change. And you're going to differentially respond to those two types of language. And you're going to start listening very clearly, not only for whether it's in this basket or this basket, but you're going to be listening for the so-called darn, D-A-R-N, why, the desire. Do they have the ability? What are the various reasons? What's the need to either continue the problematic behavior or make the change? Desire, things like, I'd really like to, I wish I could. Ability, I could do that. I might be able to do that. Reason, I'd probably feel better if, it would be good for my family if. Need, I ought to, I have to, I really should. Those are the things you're going to be listening for. And specifically what you're going to be listening for is this kind of language, because this kind of language precedes the actual change. The darn gets us up the hill, the cat gets us down the hill. I intend to, I'm going to, I'm ready to. Okay? So commitment, activation, taking steps. So basically, you'd be asking things like, why would you want to make this change? If you're eliciting this kind of stuff, how would you do it if you decided to make this change? If you were actually going to, I know you're not ready to stop smoking today. If at some point you got there, how might you do it? Because everybody does it differently. What are the 3 best reasons for you? This is a great one that I said. How important is it and why? And my favorite question that I try to incorporate a lot of times is, so what do you think you're going to do? Okay? Now, you're going to get a lot of sustained talk, and that is not bad. Dr. Yeager used the term resistance earlier in his talk. MI doesn't like the term resistance at this point because it recognizes that the old concept of resistance probably is 2 very separate things. One of the things is a very natural part of the ambivalence. If I'm engaging in a problematic behavior, even if I'm pre-contemplative and I'm saying it's fine, there are reasons I know that I shouldn't be doing it. So part of, quote, resistance is just that side of the ambivalence. All of the reasons that, some of which are very valid, that we continue to engage in problematic behaviors. Then there's an interpersonal aspect of resistance, which is discord between the client and the clinician, right? That's different. I don't like what you're saying. I don't like being here. I don't like the way you're pushing me to do things I don't want to do. Something interpersonal. So 2 components of quote-unquote resistance are, 1, a very natural part of any change process, any ambivalence, the side that is ongoing sustain, all those reasons, desirability reasons, and need to sustain, and the other is discord. And you'll see a lot of, and so what do you do with when you see that sustained talk? Sometimes we refer to it as psychological judo, i.e., don't meet resistance with resistance. So when the guy said, well, my grandfather's 92 and he's still smoking, I mean, obviously he could have said, well, he's an exception. You mean to tell me that you don't believe that smoking, that would be meeting resistance with resistance. That was sustained talk. What did he do? He just rolled with it. He didn't shine a light on it. He didn't elicit it. He didn't reflect it in a way that would encourage the person to keep talking about, wow, I wonder how your grandfather did that. What does he do to keep healthy? None of that. He just rolled with it. Okay? You might reflect it if you felt like it was useful sometimes, but you typically don't engage it. And you try to discern the difference between sustained talk, as I said, which is a natural and expected part of ambivalence, and discord, which is interpersonal. And discord takes a lot of different forms. So in the first little guy that we saw, the cardiology patient, yes, doctor, maybe. A lot of silence, a lot of saying yes to everything. Maybe he wouldn't show up for his next appointment. Maybe they'd argue, blame, minimize, sidetrack. All kinds of ways that discord manifests itself. So what if you don't get change talk? So you're sitting with someone and trying to get, listen clearly for change talk and you're not hearing it. Well, there's all kinds of strategies. We saw one, the importance and confidence rule. That's one. If you were to get more into MI, there are a wide variety of different techniques that you might employ to elicit. Again, if you think about the goal is to get the client to actually put voice to the reasons for change, then you're going to do everything you can do to elicit that change talk. So basically, you're going to use open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. If the change talk occurs, you're going to jump on it. And you're going to use the ORs to elaborate, reflect it, affirm it essentially, etc. And eventually you're going to develop a plan, which is the thing that we all do best. Okay? If you don't hear it, then you're going to use everything you can do to elicit it. And then you're going to elaborate it. That's a sort of brief example. And then just finally, it was interesting. You're here in the room and you were talking about this giving feedback. And it was making me think about what is that feedback actually doing? Why is it improving things? And I think one way to look at it is here. I mean, this is sort of 4 very commonsensical meta processes of any interaction, I think. And the critical one is engaging, right? So are we going to do something together or not? And by the way, a lot of clinicians think, well, you're a psychiatrist and you see people over years, 4 days a week, and, I work in an emergency room. There are a lot of people I see for 10 minutes and I never see again. I can do all 4 of these processes in a 10-minute interaction, but it is not MI if it doesn't have an interpersonal component. This is an interpersonal thing that happens. And you can engage people in short periods of time. Are we going to do something together in the 10 minutes that we have here together? Yes or no? Are we going to walk somewhere together? The thing that I think you were getting to is where are we going to walk? Okay? And I would suggest that feedback is largely focusing, reminding us in this iterative process, are we getting somewhere here? What is it that we're doing together? And how is it going? We might also then ask, why are we going there again? Whose idea was that? Right? And the 4th process, again, is the one that we focus on in medical school a lot. Solving, planning, fixing. Right? We jump here. This is about this stair step of, first, are we going to do anything together? And establishing that. Second, on what is it that we are trying to do together and thinking about whether we have consensus about that. Third, clarifying why the hell are we doing this from your perspective. And then, what is it that we're actually going to do? And I think the feedback helps us with these things. Okay? And that this is inherently somewhat linear and yet in reality iterative and recursive, because very often you're up here and there's a need to kind of go back here and say, wait a second, what's happening again? Right? And I think that's where the feedback comes from. So anyhow, getting back to this whole recovery business, so now if we go back and we look at things like self-direction, consumers determine their own path of recovery with their autonomy, independence, and control of resources. And what I'm trying to point out is, if you buy this sort of spirit of MI, and then you look at the way it overlays on these core elements of so-called mental health recovery, I mean, clearly this is key, right? Individualized and person-centered. I am not prescribing something that you just fit into. This is about who you are, your unique personhood. There are multiple pathways, right? Unique strengths. Your needs, preferences, experiences, and cultural background. Taking that seriously. Very much about empowering. Knowing, in fact, that the only way you're going to change is you changing. That I have no ability, none. Even if I work in a prison, I can't get another person to do something they don't want to do. I just can't. Whole life, mind, body, spirit, community, embraces all aspects of life, thinks about all kinds of different things. Definitely nonlinear. Clearly strengths-based, right? Not this is the problem, you got to solve it. More like you've done a lot of other things pretty well in your life. Wouldn't it be something if you could apply that to this problem that you have? Peer support. It's highly respectful. Puts a lot of responsibility in the hands of the patient. Recognizes that's where it needs to be. And I think a lot of psychotherapy literature comes down to the degree to which clinicians can instill hope in patients. And this is obviously a very hopeful thing. And I'll just end with a quote from Bill Miller on what he believes the active ingredients are. I don't know if there are German speakers, but there is something about the Menschenbild. Any German speakers in the room? So what does Menschenbild mean?
It means when you think about the human and Menschenbild.
I think it means kind of person building, maybe?
Yes, it's
The picture you have of the human. Okay. 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 So there is something about the underlying picture we have of others being human, the underlying positive assumptions about human nature, the living as if seeing of possibilities in the other. This may be harder to measure, but I believe that the efficacy of MI has something to do with communicating, even taking for granted, hope, profound respect, esteem, possibilities, faith in the person, freedom to change, other efficacy perhaps. And again, I mean, if this isn't recovery, I don't know what is. This is a recovery-oriented approach. So I really hope that this piques the curiosity of some of you. If you Google motivational interviewing, like Googling many things, it will open a world to you, okay? It will open a world to you. The first hit you'll probably get is motivationalinterview.org. It's really interesting. The main book is called Motivational Interviewing, Helping People Change by Miller and Rolnick. If you do get it, make sure you get the most recent edition, because one of the lovely things about this is that it's very much an evolving science. So edition 3 is about 90% different than edition 2. If you like this kind of stuff, what we just did is an exposure, okay? And there are different levels, and you can get this, if you go on that motivationalinterview.org, you will see trainings in every city all over the world, all the time, in different forms. And some people do coaching, supervision, learning communities. There's a whole bunch of ways to measure the fidelity to this practice. You can code on that, things like that. I think it has huge implications for training. My deal is I get them when they're puppies, because older dogs are harder to teach. So I get the first year residents. And again, I am not proposing this as a psychotherapeutic technique as much as a default communication style. And I think it can be somewhat transformative as a communication style. And so we do it early. And that's it. I'm always happy to talk about this and happy to entertain some conversation. Again, I apologize for my non-MI adherent teaching style, but if you guys have specific questions now, anybody have specific questions or comments now? People are ready for lunch. Okay. Well, I'll be hanging around and happy to talk to people if they want to afterward, but I'm very appreciative of your attention. Hope it was helpful. Thanks. Oh, we went over. No, we sort of went over. We did go over. Oh, I'm sorry. I get too enthusiastic about it.